evening to you. You are watching Biz1st in Focus. This evening we are going to discuss about the construction sector and the environmental impact assessments, that is also jargon when it comes to the construction sector. Who are we going to talk to? We are going to talk to Mrs. Arosha Jayasundara, who is a consultant to the Institute of Builders, a consultant to the South Asian Lean Construction Institute, and a director at the Asian Institute of Excellence. Thank you for being here with us, ma'am, this evening. I want to get straight to the topic. Now, the Central Expressway is a topic that we at Newsfirst have been very closely following. We have reported at a number of times that a proper environmental impact assessment has not been done when it comes to the construction of the third phase of the Central Expressway. We had the similar problem during the construction activities of the Southern Expressway as well. Even the Katnayak Expressway had this problem to a certain degree. My question to you is not about the Central Expressway as a whole, but regarding the environmental impact assessment. Why is an environmental impact assessment important when maybe the government sector or the private sector takes up a construction project?
Yes, good evening, Chaturanga. Of course, environmental assessments are very important because you have issues like soil erosion or water issues or effects on the surrounding people. So we would say that those are the very important reasons one should look at environmental approvals. And I am sure they are being conducted, and any issues that are arising are being addressed. So we have confidence that they are addressing these issues.
But now when it comes to various projects here in the urban area, as you can, if you go out into the open, you see a lot of construction happening. Minute project, let's say someone wants to build up a building somewhere, an apartment complex. Do you see the importance of carrying out an environmental impact assessment there as well, or is it only for mega projects like putting up a highway or putting up a lot of apartment complexes? How does this work?
Of course, the bigger the project, the more important the environmental assessment. But I think it will depend on where the project is located as well. For instance, if it's in Hambantota, where you have a lot of wildlife, then obviously in order to protect the tourism sector of Sri Lanka, it's important as well to have an environmental assessment in those areas as well. So I think it depends on the location as well, apart from the size of the project. But obviously, the bigger the size of the project, the more impact it's going to have on the local soil and water, sewage systems, animals, people, etc.
So, with what you're telling right now, you said bigger the project, the bigger the impact it has, but the impact is still present even if it's a small project. That's what you're saying?
Yes, there may be some impact.
But now we see a lot of construction happening in Colombo. Let me focus your attention to the Colombo area. Now there are a lot of construction happening in our area as well. If you take the Dehiwala Mount Lavinia stretch, a lot of buildings coming up. There have been instances where there were collapses, the building collapsed in Vallavatta, things like that also happening. Now, if proper environmental impact assessments were done, there was a chance of these constructions not being so lethal, so dangerous in nature. Am I right in saying that, or is that another way?
I think also one has to not forget the various planning permissions, etc., which were required. And I think in those areas there was a lot of issues about whether the proper planning permissions had been gotten or not, rather than environmental assessment, because within the city, of course, there's an impact, but we're not looking at it to the same extent. I think we're looking more at building permissions and getting the right approvals in place.
Construction in the urban areas, I'm trying to keep to that point because there is a lot happening. As I mentioned earlier, if you go out from our building here, you see a lot of buildings coming around this same area, Union Place as well. So all these constructions need to have the proper approvals of the relevant authorities. Illegal constructions, how do you, yes, when you look at them on the paper, you know this has received this approval. but these documents, you know, these days technology advancements, these documents can very easily be forged. So with all those happening, how do you all as consultants or experts in the construction sector know how to differentiate between a proper construction, correct construction, if I may put it that way, and a not so correct construction?
Definitely the various bodies that are in this construction sector, Institute of Builders and the Construction Institute, etc., definitely know the requirements. Any good engineer will know the requirements, but sometimes I think, particularly with the smaller buildings, they don't get the right engineers, or perhaps when they're building itself, the contractors are not actually putting in what was originally meant to be put into that building. So these are the issues that arise, unfortunately, and they're not regulated enough and not supervised enough, so these issues arise.
When you look at our country in terms of construction, and when you look at the other countries in our region, let's take, for example, countries like India, they're far ahead of us when it comes to the technology that they use. They have their machinery being manufactured in their country itself, so there is that point as well. But how can we look at, is there a benchmark for us as a country to say this is where we stand in the region, or are we in the back foot still? Where are we heading?
Today the construction sector is contributing to about 6.5–7% of GDP. A few years ago it was about 10%, so we are looking to get back to that 10% mark today.
Why is there the decrease? What do you see the reasons for this decrease?
I think there's just been a general slowing down of big infrastructure projects, but actually the biggest component of the construction sector is actually the offices and the houses. 40% is for the infrastructural section. There
was an allegation, if I may put it that way, regarding the previous government, that they were focusing a lot on infrastructure projects. So hence, as you said, 10% to the GDP was from the construction sector. Now, this government, when it came into power, didn't give that much of attention up until the Central Expressway and the Ruwanpur Expressway issues came up. Is this why there is a reduction in the construction sector?
I think just overall there's been a little slowing down of the construction sector, and yes, of course that infrastructure has also contributed to it, but I think in general the other sector, that 60%, has also slowed down.
Now we know that there are a lot of costs involved in the construction sector. We had a few gentlemen coming on this same program and saying, look, the construction cost is high, the youths do not want to enter the construction sector, they look for other lucrative jobs. Right. But as I told you, there are a lot of construction projects happening around us as we speak, so there is construction happening. What is this cost being high? There's a little contradiction of that statement.
Yes. Actually, as we said earlier, we have launched the South Asian Lean Construction Institute, and actually there's a lot of global figures. McKinsey has put out various reports, etc. And unfortunately, although the construction sector is such a large part of the economy of so many countries, it also tends to be the least efficient sector of all the industries. So manufacturing, retail, services, etc., are all much more efficient than the construction sector. And sort of a global benchmark for the construction sector is, in any project you have, and particularly a large project, you have 30 to 40% waste. So effectively we're saying that the project cost could be reduced by 30 to 40% if the right lean methodology was used.
With that, we have to go into a short commercial break. Stay with us. You're watching Biz1st in Focus. Welcome back to the show. You're watching Biz1st in Focus. We are in discussion with Mrs. Arosha Jayasundara, who is a consultant to the Institute of Builders, consultant to the South Asian Lean Construction Institute, and a director at the Asian Institute of Excellence. I want to ask a bit more of these institutions as well from you, but before we go there, we were talking about the costs that are involved in the construction sector. Now, you said that the construction is high because there's a wastage component involved as well, and you use the word lean construction. What does lean construction actually mean?
Lean construction is actually lean from the origin of lean, and Lean Six Sigma has been around since the 1940s. It's associated with the Toyota production systems and the Ford motor cars and Motorola, and it's basically a methodology to improve efficiency and productivity in any organization for that matter. So it's about waste. You see, unfortunately, a lot of people and organizations do not see the waste. The waste is, for instance, excessive motion, excessive transport, defects, people not having the right skill set, etc. So if we look at these aspects in the construction sector, we can actually reduce a lot of these and then improve the productivity and enable construction companies to reduce their costs, and then effectively they're able to bid for bigger projects at a lower cost and win these projects.
So with all of that happening, obviously there must be a sector of people who think, look, is this really possible in our country? Lean construction is just a theory. How can you actually practice it? There must definitely be a opposing faction as well to this theory. You mentioned about the obtaining the proper skill set as well. Before we go there, to this opposing faction, is there such an opposing faction, or am I just exaggerating the fact? Or if there is, what is your answer to them?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a sort of conscious opposing factor, but certainly there's a subconscious opposing factor, and that subconscious opposing factor is actually the lack of awareness of this methodology. In fact, the South Asian Lean Construction Institute, the Indian Lean Construction Institute has said actually it's the attitude of people that is the biggest deterrent to imposing a lean methodology in these companies.
Attitude is a problem in all sectors, not only in the construction sector, especially in the political arena. Attitude seems to be a bit of a problem. But before we go there, or we'll not go there at all, I want to focus your attention on the skill set. You said that the proper skill set is of course important when it comes to matters like construction, because people's lives depend on the proper construction. So, country like us, do we have the adequate skill set that is required for the construction sector to move forward?
Okay, let me just quote from you, which is a very shocking figure actually, the World Economic Forum, which I use as a benchmark. It's a competitiveness benchmark. And actually, if you look at their figures, they show Sri Lanka, out of 145 countries, Sri Lanka is about the 73rd country. And it's been there for quite a while. Switzerland and Singapore are right at the top. And what is more shocking is actually that if you look at the components of productivity, one of the key components of productivity, as we know, is labor. And out of 140 countries, or 145, depending on each year, Sri Lanka is ranking at 135, which is almost the bottom of 145 countries. So there's a big issue about the productivity of our workforce in general in Sri Lanka. And these are figures that foreign investors will also look at. So they'll see, okay, Sri Lanka labor productivity is 135 out of 145 countries.
Why is this figure that way? Who decides that, and what is the actual reason for this?
I think the reason is, of course, the government sector is also included in this. But the reason is, again, unlike a lot of other countries which are not just looking at the growth rate, they're also looking at the productivity of the different sectors, you know, productivity of the rubber sector or the gem sector or the tea sector, etc. And productivity, we're talking about how much value is given for that input. Basically, we don't address this really in Sri Lanka.
That is the reason for this happening. Now, another concern in the construction sector when it comes to government construction projects is the delay in how it's going to actually happen. They say they'll do it in a particular time frame, but they exceed the time frame, still there is a delay, and then sometimes in rare occasions we see that the project is totally completely abandoned, and then, you know, it's just there. So situations like this, what is your advice when it comes, if let's say a government official is watching this program, and after this program they contact you and ask you, look, we have this issue where we can't manage our construction sector properly. What is your advice to them briefly? What would you tell them?
Actually, the biggest, again, if we look at the various lean construction institutes in USA and UK, and they say more or less 40% of projects sort of are late. You know, they don't finish on time, and 20% odd finish over budget, right? Yeah. So the biggest issue, again, according to the research that's been done, is that the management. It's basically the management, because we think that if we have an engineer or a project management person, etc., that's enough. But it's not enough, because a lot of the issues that happen at the beginning of a project, and then it sort of rolls out and impacts the project down the line. So what we would say is management is a very critical issue. So one has to look at the project on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, and have what they call is like a big room, you know, where everybody gets together and discusses what the issues are. And you have systems, you know, like last planner systems, you have building integrated modeling systems. All these systems can also be used, but the management and getting everyone on board, getting the owners, the stakeholders, everybody on board is the most critical.
Sometimes, Mrs. Jayasundara, what happens is, now the government decides on a particular project. During that government itself, the stones or the ground breaking ceremonies are done in an extravagant manner, wasting a lot of public funds. And then they go on with the construction. The delay goes on, the delay happens, and then what happens is that project is completely unnecessary when the project is complete, because the requirement is then something else. So the government has to have proper policies as well when they look at proper mega construction projects as well, right?
Yes, of course. I mean, lean construction is about how to build it more efficiently, you know, so to achieve the budget or less, or to do it within the time frame, right? So we are not looking at whether the building is required or not. That, of course, is a different matter.
Issue.
Yes.
With that, Ms. Jayasundara, we have to go into another short commercial break. We are talking to Mrs. Jayasundara about the construction sector. We have to move on to the development side of things as well. Stay with us. You are watching Biz1st in Focus. Welcome back to the show. You're watching Biz1st in Focus. We are in discussion with Mrs. Arosha Jayasundara. As promised, we are going to talk to her about development and the construction and development, how this goes hand in hand. Ms. Jayasundara, now every time someone comes up here and talks about construction, except for you, they have managed to put in the word development in. Yes, there is a connection obviously between construction and development, but just carrying out construction or infrastructure projects does not mean we have development. We need something beyond that, sustainable development. How do you as experts look at construction and actually achieving sustainable development in our country?
I think when we say sustainable development, we're talking about the growth of the economy. And I was just reading recently some work Singapore had done to grow the economy. And they have, for instance, a focus on the small and medium enterprise, because the SME sector is such a important sector of the economy, the growth engine of the economy. So one has to have, for instance, infrastructure that supports the SME sector. One has to have skilled staff. One has to invest in research and development. All these are the things that Singapore has done, which has enabled them to come to the most competitive nation for 2 or 3 years in a row. So infrastructure, of course, is very important, but I think we have to look at the other factors as well, which makes a strong economy.
With everything that is happening in our country, policy instability and all of that, as you said, the investors who want to come from abroad, who want to invest in infrastructure projects here, will look at the statistics that they have before them. with what you're saying, the statistics don't look that good. Why would the investors come, if I may ask you that question? Is there anything good that is happening in our country?
Yes. Well, why would the investors come? I think that is something that has to be worked upon. You know, investors don't just come ad hoc, so they have to see very strategic reasons to come.
Do you have any?
So we have a lot of foreign construction companies who are coming and doing projects here because they manage to bid and win the projects. So we are having investors, not that we are not, but Sri Lanka is currently 73rd position in the World Competitive Index, and it could do much better.
What steps should we take in the positive direction? What if we are to actually invest, attract more investors rather? What do we have to look at? How do we come up from that 73rd position?
Yeah. So what Singapore also about 10 or 15 years ago had this issue. They wanted to come up very fast. So they set up a think tank of people who, economists, people in the productivity sector and other people. They had a think tank and they addressed the areas they wanted to address, you know. So they said, okay, skill set, innovation, smart city, technology, productivity of our people, and they worked on these factors and they came up. So I think we talk about Sri Lanka needing to export more, but we really need to delve down deeper. It's not just a question of getting free trade agreements. It's a question of are these companies competitive? Are they producing goods at a lower price or better quality than those in the rest of the SAARC region, for instance? So we really haven't addressed productivity in Sri Lanka. Only now the National Productivity Secretariat is actually getting figures to see the productivity of each sector in Sri Lanka. So we have a long way to go. If we want our GDP to move up, if we want our income to move up, technology alone is not enough. Our people have to be much more efficient. They have to deliver much more for what they are getting.
Speaking about efficiency of people, we see a lot of workers coming into the country from abroad. Chinese workers, we have Indian workers. We had a construction project happening right next door. We saw a lot of Indians being used. How does this impact the balance between the use of Sri Lankans as laborers for these projects, and is it cheaper? Is that why people are doing it? Why is there a lot of foreign workers here?
I think a lot of the construction companies have had issues getting people to work for them, and they say actually a lot of young men are in the trishaw business, but my view is also that the sector needs to have a better, career plan for people, and we tend to sort of dismiss construction workers as labor. I feel that we need to sort of, attract them more, show them maybe a career path, how they can upskill themselves, etc. Because of that, many young men, and actually we're not having very many women in the construction sector, which we can have, but many young men prefer, maybe they think it's an easier job to drive a trishaw and they earn the equivalent, but it's not a long-term career really.
While there are risks involved in the construction field to a person who might come into it, it is also a lucrative industry. People make a lot of money in the construction sector. So with that, once again, it's like the dilemma we had earlier with it being high costs, and there are projects happening, whereas this is the opposite of it. There is a lot of money involved, but people don't want to come into it.
Right.
So to these youngsters or teenagers or whoever it might be who is interested into coming to this sector of things, do you have a message to them for them to actually think of maybe coming into the construction sector?
Well, I think I have a message more to the companies, the management, etc., to make it attractive and maybe to do some research. I know Moratoa University has done a lot of research on why people are not moving into the construction sector. So there is research, and these factors are there. Women, there's no like special treatment for women if they have to spend the night there, and there's a very high sort of high accident rates, and the safety is not addressed enough, and compensation on death is quite low. So all these issues are there. So that is
management of these companies have to look at these things.
Yeah, rather than just dismiss it and say labor issues. This is labor. You know, we have to, I think, see how these people benefit more, because there is a lot of money to be made. So also the people at the bottom, if they can show themselves more productive, if we start using some of the lean methodology to maybe measure one team against another team, and give them incentives, we can do something. I don't think it's a solution just to dismiss it and say, okay, let's get the Bangladeshi people down, or Chinese, etc.
So what you are saying is these companies that are involved in the construction also have to look out from the traditional way of doing things, and maybe do something more to attract good skills to whatever construction project they are doing. Is that summarizing?
Yes, I definitely agree with that as well, yes.
I want to ask you a few questions about the Institute of Builders, the South Asian Lean Construction Institute, and the Asian Institute of Excellence. If you can tell me very briefly what these institutions actually do.
Okay. The Institute of Builders, of course, has its members, and it provides services to the members. I mean, one of the new services they're providing is actually this Lean, South Asian Lean Construction Institute, which is to roll out lean seminars, etc. But they are also introduced this green building concept and the clean building, and they're actually going to run a series of workshops and have certification in lean, green, and clean for their members. So that's what they do, and the South Asian Lean Construction Institute was just formed about a couple of weeks ago. So we are going to try and make our companies stronger, so that they can also compete for these massive projects, rather than giving it over to foreign companies, you know, which is a shame. So that is what the South Asian Lean Construction Institute is going to do: roll out lectures, some consulting, see how they can help companies reduce the cost, become more efficient, bid more competitively, etc. And my company, which is the Asian Institute of Excellence, has been in this field for quite a few years, and has done work with banks and tourism sectors on operational excellence, on improving the quality of their product, reducing lead times, reducing costs, etc. Yeah.
That's great. Ms. Jayasundan, thank you very much for being here with us on Biz1st in Focus. I want to thank you for agreeing to come on our show on short notice, and thank you for being here. We can see a positive step towards getting our country from that 73rd slot up in the construction sector. We spoke extensively. You can obviously watch our show on our social media handles as well: Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We hope that you will join us next week as well. I've been Saturang Hapwarachi. Thank you very much for watching.